record this. It's being transcribed also on my otter. So thankfully we didn't lose any of that.
Okay.
But go ahead, continue with that thought.
Yeah. So one of the things I've done in the last year is I worked with this veterans choir at the Seattle Opera.
Wow.
And there, and I passed it off. It's a long drive for me up there, and I had too many other obligations to keep doing it, but I passed it off. And now the chorus master of Seattle Opera is doing it, but they are doing a new oratorio that was written based on their stories of service. And so it's not an opera, but it's a really dramatic concert piece. And that's going to be premiered, I think, on Veterans Day this coming fall.
That's
and
you started that.
Pardon?
You started that.
No, I didn't start it. That was there was actually the Seattle Opera premiered. I don't know if they premiered it, but they did an opera that was The Rising and the Falling, and it was about I think the Iraq War, about Iraqi war vets, and they actually had non-trained veteran singers singing in the chorus. And those singers decided they wanted to keep singing together because they really have a close bond. And so they kept going with this choir just to keep singing together. And then another, he's also a singer, Damien Eater, I think his name is, but he's also a composer. He sings with the Seattle Opera, but he's also a composer. And so the same librettist who wrote that opera interviewed all of these chorus members, and then they turned that into an opera, or into an oratorio, and that Damien's setting. And my husband is a vet. He was in Afghanistan twice.
What years by chance?
Pardon?
What years?
He was in Afghanistan from, twice within 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 2011 to 2012, and then 2013 to 2014.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for your service in supporting him, and thank you for his service.
Yeah, thank you too. That was quite a journey. So he was active duty for 6 years, and so yeah, and anyway, the
Small world.
and in the end, so for example, in my opera Verlorene Heimat, so that's drawn from this true story, and I did all this historical research. Mm-hmm. And the instrumentation, I kept it small so that it could be performed as so it was affordable actually, for schools or whatever to do it. But I featured the clarinet, and that was because of the connection with klezmer music and the role of the Jewish girl in that opera. And also I had folk music sources that I drew on as the musical basis. And I forgot what was so then this seems like a completely unrelated thing, but
it's completely related. It's just mind-blowing how everything interconnects somehow in some way. Everything becomes one gigantic puzzle piece, puzzle in a bigger puzzle. And so go ahead. What were you going to say that was unrelated?
Well, I just got done writing a review for of the Seattle Opera's performance of Das Rheingold. So that's part of this huge ring cycle. And for that cycle in particular, Wagner invented this instrument, the Wagner tuba.
Yes.
Which is like a combination between a tuba and euphonium. Mm-hmm. And
that can't be really played in tune.
Right. Right. It's really difficult. But it colors, the whole cycle. And it has very important, that timbre has very important symbolic meaning for the whole opera. And I
Like melancholy?
Depth.
Depth.
Like it's visual, it kind of conjures up the visual depth of the River Rhine and the underworld. That's a big part of this opera. And also the weight of the theme of this opera, which is the burden that of the not the conflict, the temptation to exchange love for power, and because of fear, and the dramatic tragedies that occur because of that. So it's a very heavy theme as well throughout the whole cycle. And I find that that Wagner, he uses symbolism all over the place, and it was no accident, like just no coincidence that he decided to use that instrumentation. And euphonium, when I was the way that I was connected with Travis Scott is that my colleague at the college where I was teaching, Hiram College, knew Travis and invited him to come to do a recital. And then I said to Travis, if I write a sonata for euphonium, will you perform it on this recital? Like I said, I'd be glad to accompany you because I'm a pianist too. And I said, and I would also love to then write a sonata that we premiere. And I also was I kind of knew the sound of the euphonium. I think it's actually, going back a step, I had written this one piece that I call Pas de Deux for the Cleveland Composers Guild. They have this program called the Junior Concert, and they pair composers with students, and the composers write pieces for specific students. So I was paired with a euphonium player, a high school kid. Yeah. And being actually, like, my music foundation is built on being a brass player. And
trumpet, from what I read.
So although, and I played in some brass quartets, but I'm not even sure we had a euphonium in the quartet, right? So, but anyway, I was kind of part of that brass family for my whole childhood and into college. And then I realized euphonium, it just felt so natural composing for it, because I could, even though it's in a different octave, I could just like feel, and I remember as a trumpet player that if I played in orchestra or something, I would be really bored, because we were just percussion and we would just sit there and not having it in the interesting parts. But in some of the wind ensemble music that I really loved was like Holst and Vaughan Williams, where the trumpets had these beautiful melodies. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to write this melodic piece for the euphonium. And this high school student played it really well. And then when I was collaborating with Scott, all of a sudden I thought, hey, I'm going to make that piece the second movement of this sonata. So I composed the other two movements around that that piece.
Okay, so he didn't get to premiere the entire piece, just the first and third.
Yeah, although I did a little bit revising of the second piece. And then now he has commissioned me to arrange that piece, the Pas de Deux, that he really loved, for wind ensemble. So I'm working on that right now.
Awesome.
And yeah.
So going back to the question that I asked you before we started recording, and before I do that, I might as well welcome everybody to the Euphonium Summit of 2023. We have the privilege and honor to have Dr. Sonntag with us from the West Coast of the United States. Amazing composer, artist, all around, like virtuoso. Like, y'all, you need to listen to this. And I'll put all the descriptions to her bio and where you can find out more about everything she does and is. But this is going to be the short synopsis, and sorry to interrupt you, but we might as well get started. This is all more than likely going to go on live and probably unedited, just because of the richness that you bring to the table and every one of our artists and composers. So Dr. Dawn Sonntag, her music of Olympia-based, she's a Olympia-based composer. I'm reading her bio on her actual website, which I'll link below. Includes operas, choral works, instrumental chamber music, works for organ and piano, liturgical music, and music for dance and documentary films. I'm going to stop because y'all don't understand the capabilities of the Euphonium and where it's about to like transcend and go. I don't want to spill the beans. It's so exciting. Her works have been performed by soloists like Travis Scott, Dr. Travis Scott, and many others, ensembles across the U.S. and abroad, including the Burning River Baroque, the Delgani Quartet, the Ensign Chorus, which is amazing. More information to come on that. I don't know if we captured this on the recording or not, but it is in the book series transcribed. Let's see, orchestra, the Ensign Chorus and Orchestra in Seattle, the Cleveland Chamber Chorus, the Portland State Chamber Choir, the Fairbanks Summer Arts Festival Orchestra, the Cleveland Opera Theater, the Hartford Opera Theater, and more. Her art songs have been widely performed in recital and are included in recordings by sopranos Michelle Marie Viertek, Every Tiny Thing, and Megan Einen,
I think Enan.
Enan, and by Burning River Baroque duo Melania Rauschenfels and Paula Most, who commissioned the cycle Love Poems in the time of climate change. Her music has been broadcast on WLCV in Cleveland and in Portland, Oregon, and is published by Carl Fisher, North Star Music, and Dagny Press. Now, I want to leave it right there with Dagny Press because that's where you can find, and I'll put the links below, the Sonata for Euphonium. Oh man, we're in such a treat. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Sonntag.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's get back to what you were saying and go into what Dr. Scott has commissioned you in working with that wind ensemble piece. I want to really dive into that.
Yeah, he commissioned me to arrange a piece I had written for Euphonium. It's about a 3-minute piece. It's part of the second movement of my sonata for Euphonium, and to arrange it for wind ensemble and using something that I have not done before, but using flexible instrumentation. So I'm working on that. I'm finding actually that that's a really interesting concept, so that it actually takes some of the weight off me actually about specifying which instruments are playing what, but I am really enjoying that process. I think I'll be done in a couple of weeks. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So with that being said, there's a little rattle in the background. I do apologize to the audience. So let's start back at the top. When did you start composing and crafting your own music?
Well, I have been improvising and making up music as long as I can remember. That's my first memory of my parents got a piano when I was 3, and they both read music, they both play, but they're not professional musicians. And someone gave them piano, and I immediately climbed up on the bench, and I was just thrilled that I could make up songs and play by ear. That's what I started doing right off the bat. Yeah. And then I would improvise all the time on the piano and on the trumpet as I was taking trumpet lessons. And I knew somehow I wanted to be a composer. I was really fascinated. I was self-taught on the piano. So my parents read music. They just showed me, here's middle C. And I took it from there. But they had a stack of music books of, like piano lesson books, like from beginning to advanced. And I just went through those, and I was so fascinated with the composers, and really taught myself. And I would do things like turn the music upside down or play it backwards. And I didn't know that those were compositional techniques. I would just do that. So, but I didn't have, I didn't have teachers, which is not a terrible thing. It was actually a good thing because it allowed me to be very creative. Mm-hmm. It didn't really bother me that I didn't see any female composers because I was a trumpet player and I was usually like the only girl in the section. So I just thought, oh, well, that's normal for me. So, and then, so when I went into college, when I started as an undergrad, I auditioned on piano and trumpet, and I was accepted. And then I went to my music theory teacher and I said, I want to be a composer. And she was like, well, what have you written? And I had improvised, and I was 18. Like I didn't have this big, portfolio to hand her. And I just took that as kind of like, oh, well, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And then I loved counterpoint. I loved choral arranging. And then I got really great feedback from my professors. But I also had learned as an undergraduate at that time that if you wanted to be taken seriously as a composer, you had to compose atonal music. Back then, that was still going on. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be pushed into that box. And so I'm just going to study performance, but somehow I know that I'm going to compose someday. So, I went through grad school, still studying performance. And as an undergrad already, I started, I worked as a pianist for the Milwaukee Ballet Company to support myself.
Wow.
And I would improvise all the time because you have to as a ballet pianist. And I would actually write pieces, and they would choreograph some of them. And then I would promptly throw them in the trash because I thought, well, this is just junk because it's not real music. It's not atonal and no one's going to listen. And I just composed, a very couple of choral pieces that are all the same thing. Well, these are just for the choirs I'm directing and it doesn't matter. And then finally, that voice, that feeling like I have to do this just kept pressing forward. And finally, when I was looking for a doctoral program, I actually had a couple of choral pieces premiered by the Ohio State Choirs.
Wow.
And I got great feedback. And I thought, okay, when I do my doctorate, I'm going to study composition, even though I don't have an undergraduate or graduate degree in it, and I don't have a big portfolio, but I'm going to do this. So I looked for a school where I could double in performance to get in.
On piano or trumpet?
By this time it was voice, because I switched to voice when I was an undergrad. I loved foreign languages. I loved singing. And I realized pretty quickly that I was going to have to make a decision, that I was not going to be able to do well on 3 instruments. And so I gave up trumpet.
Oh, that's fine. We'll take you as part of the family, as you now are officially. If you haven't been officialized, welcome to the Euphonium family. I can't wait to have you on future summits. Wow, what a treat! What a treat! So it says that you went to UTEP to get your undergrad in your bachelor's of music. Is that correct? Okay,
that's correct.
Now you've written for ballet. Did you, being an El Paso, a fellow El Pasoan, did you write any music for ballet folklorical? I'm curious.
No, I didn't. I
That would have
didn't.
been such a treat.
Yeah, mostly it was for the Milwaukee Ballet, where before I came to El Paso, I did work as a ballet pianist for the oh no, that was in San Antonio for a school there, Incarnate Word College. their
Incarnate Word,
program.
yeah.
Yeah. No, when I got to El Paso, I really zoned in on focusing on voice, because that's what my Bachelor of Music was in voice. And I kind of hid the fact that I was a pianist until the very end, and then I accompanied some of my fellow students.
So was Dr. Hufstadter there at the time?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he was my professor. Yeah.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Yes, he
Small,
was.
small world.
Yes.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Okay. Okay, so the second question is, when did you first involve euphonium into your compositions? And before we started this recording, you shared about the competition for young artists in Ohio.
Yes, in
Okay.
Cleveland.
Yes. So Cleveland, do you want to go back over for those that are catching the recording only, since they haven't read the transcriptions to the entire interview, and y'all are lucky.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in Cleveland, I was part of the Cleveland Composers Guild, which is a really fine organization that supports 50 composers they allow into their circles. And they have a program called the Junior Concert that pairs composers with students, and composers compose a piece for a specific student. So I was paired with a euphonium student. He was a high school student. And I composed this 3-minute piece for him that I called Pas de deux, because it was, I felt, drawing on my dance and ballet background, it was a dance between the euphonium and the piano. So very lyrical and melodic. And he performed it beautifully. And then years later, I mean, it was a few years later, then euphonist, is that the right way to say it?
Euphoniumist, it's fine.
Euphoniumist, yeah.
Just like people mispronounce our names all the time, right?
Right. Travis Scott was invited to do a recital at our college, and I was going to accompany him, this pianist. And so I proposed to him that I compose a sonata for euphonium that we premiere at that concert. And I used this pas de deux as the second movement of that sonata, and then composed, the first movement and the last movement around it. So
for our beginner artists and those going through the beginning stages of their euphonium career or time, whether it's long or short, I want to thank y'all for joining us on this Euphonium Summit with Dr. Sonntag and all the other international artists and composers. Having Dr. Sonntag on here, I know you hear opera, you hear orchestra, you hear ballet. What's this all have to do with euphonium? Well, it's really interesting to see having this Euphonium Summit and watching all these composers and their frameworks where they operate from, to grab hold of something outside the box, including euphonium, because euphonium is not at all part of the orchestral composition yet. We're working on that, and I'm looking forward to incorporating all this, or having a helping hand in incorporating orchestral, ballet, opera. And if you're not privy to the transcriptions of this recording, you might want to get that copy and read through an amazing conversation we had before we started this recording. And it gives me shivers because with Matteo Tundo from Italy, with Dr. Sonntag, with Elizabeth Rahm, with all these composers internationally, when we come together and show the capabilities and possibilities and potential of what Euphonium can do in performance, I won't give away more of that transcription that you can get and download. Before we started this recording, go check it out. We might cover more of that here in our recorded. It's so cool. But again, Dr. Sonntag, thank you, and for joining us for the Euphonium Summit and geeking out on this really cool subject matter, because diving into the composer's world and getting to know your intentions, your frame of mind, and what really kind of winds your clock, kind of like a one of those old traditional clocks or even a hand watch. It's really phenomenal getting to the inner workings. So we've covered quite a bit of the questions. When did you first, like, I guess it was when you first got that piano, is when you really wanted to own that identity as, yes, I want to do this my entire life. Let's go.
Yeah, that's true. It was just so part of me, and it was so, I mean, I can still remember, have really clear memories of when I was a child, sitting at the piano, looking at these pieces, like by Beethoven, by Chopin, by Saint-Saëns, by Kabalevsky and Bartók. And I was just a little kid, and I was not being forced. That was a really important thing. And I was being allowed to do it, and I had access to it. I mean, I think having a teacher is a really important and good thing. And my parents did read music, and they did play piano and organ themselves. So, and we did a lot of singing in the school tradition that I grew up in. It was just integral to our education. It wasn't like a separate thing, and we didn't have to, it would never have been cut from our curriculum. And then I also, one thing that was so important is that when I was in 5th grade, I started playing in a band, and it was an excellent program. It was a theater program for the high school, and they had funding to send out these teachers, private teachers, to the schools. So you didn't have to, you would just leave your classroom for half an hour and have your lesson at school.
Mm-hmm.
And then on Saturday, you would all go to band rehearsal. And I remember I was just, I wanted to do it. I begged my parents to let me do this. And then my dad, I mean, this was like a 30-minute drive one way to get to this rehearsal. And he is a teacher who was really hardworking. And he spent every Saturday from like until I got from 5th to 8th grade, driving me to and from these band rehearsals on Saturday mornings. And it was just for me to be playing in this group with all these other kids and this great music. Like I still remember the very first piece that we did. I was in 5th grade. It was Schubert March Militaire. I'll never forget that.
Wow.
So like the names of the composers would stick in my head. And that's also how I got a great sense of like rhythm, where sometimes if you're learning piano or organ, because you're not playing with somebody else, you can just kind of cheat on the rhythm. You can't do that in band, right? So, and you have to, you've got syncopation, and you've got to be playing on offbeats. So that's all really, you've got to be listening to the other parts. And that's also, as a composer, that was really great training, even though I didn't know it. And I would be so fascinated, like, oh, listen to what the oboes are playing now. And then we come in after that. And I would, I just love listening to all the parts coming together.
That's incredible. So when you were growing up, um, for the beginner artist, they may not know or still can't believe that we didn't have the internet when we were growing up. We didn't have YouTube. How did you go about learning these pieces of music or getting a frame of reference? Did you just like sight read it and just go at it, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, I had no recordings. We had, my parents were not, I mean, they played like, my mother would play some of the music out of the more advanced piano books. That was it. And she didn't play very many of them. So I had to read the music. I was not learning it by ear. And I had to figure out the rhythms and
The intentions.
and it was like, yeah, and it was really like fascinating to me. And then I had to the musical terminology like andante or allegro, like what does this mean? And the interesting thing is what I learned is that, especially looking back, is that the tempo of a piece is, you'll get what the right tempo is from the notation eventually. Like there will be a natural tempo that fits. And that's why composers didn't always write metronome markings. They would just write allegro, and then you have to feel it. So there is also room for some interpretation. But it's, usually I would get it because the music was written in a way. That's why great composers are still remembered, because they wrote the music in a way that you could translate and then reproduce, and come out with something that was pretty close, at least, to what they had imagined.
That's incredible. So when I'm going back to the time where you spent with the euphonium player in Cleveland, Ohio, how many rewrites did you kind of take that piece through before the euphonium student artist like premiered it for that event? If you remember.
I don't remember. I know that because I was teaching full time at that time. So a lot of times the only time I had for composing was during the summer. And I had a couple of projects that I had done. So I know that it took me a few weeks to compose that piece. And I do go back, and it's kind of like a whole to part thing where I have the basic melodies and harmonies, and then I'll go back and I tweak little details. And I do, if there's a piano part, I'm playing it myself to make sure that it lies in the hands, and that there's, that the chords are voiced in in the best way. And as far as the melodic line, I'm always singing the lines. So
that's really incredible. So, and I have so many, like, our whole conversation, this is just really fascinating. The principles that you implemented yourself, like without any formal lessons, formal training in composition, especially with piano, really diving into so as I'm conjuring up what to like really dive deeper on is, when did you start submitting your works to publishers?
Let's see. I think actually while I was doing my master's in choral conducting at Ohio State. No. This was actually while I was doing my doctorate, and I had composed a couple of choral pieces, and I went to the ACDA national conference. It was in Miami that year. And I just went down to the publishers all have these booths set up. And I went down to Theodore Presser, and the thing is, publishers these days do not just take cold submissions, like that you have to be invited by them to submit your stuff. And I thought, well, what the heck? Doesn't hurt to ask. So I just
Worst thing
went
they
and
can say is no.
right. So I just introduced myself to the person standing there, and he said, well, send me some of your pieces. So I did. And then he said, okay, these are best, Theodore Presser's, at least it was, connected with Carl Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
So he said Carl Fisher would be the place to have these pieces published. And so then I got those 2 pieces published.
Wow.
And I haven't been, up until recently, and then I had another small publisher invite me to send some art songs, and there was recently an art song anthology where I was invited to submit some pieces. It's a new anthology of 20th century art songs that's specially for young singers. And so anyway, but I was concentrating on just composing, and then I'd get a performance, and then I'm also teaching and doing this other stuff. So I wasn't really great about getting my music up, but I would get, people would email me, say, hey, I would like to perform this, or I'd like to, maybe we'll perform this at this or that conference. So finally, this year, I decided to officially self-publish under the name Dagny Press. And
that's your own.
Yeah, it's my own.
That's awesome.
Uh-huh. And that way that because the reality is that while I think I would really like to have my music published by a large publisher, but I have much more control. All the royalties are mine if I self-publish. And then what I am in the process now is of getting it out to different distributors like J.W. Pepper. And you have to send the, things, certain pieces are appropriate for certain distributors. And so that's what I'm working on now.
So for all the Euphonium artists, just check out the links below to her link to her shop, so you can get the all her works, and perhaps sometime in the future, those collection of 20 art pieces, artworks for vocal will be transcribed, perchance for baritone euphonium, maybe. Or you can get it and then sight read it and see how it goes for you. Because for those that are interested in composition or even want to dive into the best way, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I played a lot of church music growing up, and especially in El Paso, right down the road on Montana. We did a lot of 4-part harmony. And choral music is 4-part harmony, usually with descant, just like church music. So hint, you can do a euphonium quartet, maybe with a descant like soloist piece with those pieces of music, and maybe, just maybe, send it over to Dr. Sonntag and see if she likes it, and you can get a checklist of approval or whatever. Just an idea, just off the cuff. It really seems like your career, your passion for composition and writing music is a lot like eating the richest chocolate. It's really decadent, your career, what you've done, and it's all going to be on the links below, especially on our website at farmfordreams.com, on her artist profile. Oh man, like the richest chocolate mousse. I don't know. What's your favorite dessert?
Well, it's funny that you say that because I think about like, so if I'm given an opportunity for a commission and then I have all these choices, it's just like going into, yeah, into like a chocolate shop and you get to choose this and put this all together. That's, or it's just like shiny, sparkly jewelry that you get to play with. That's what it feels like.
That's incredible. I was thinking like when you were talking and just delighting us with your knowledge and your passion here. Thank you again. It was reminding me of like, man, that seems like I'm at a pie store or some kind of chocolate shop, or you're up in the north. You've gone up to the northwest. You've probably been to Bohm's.
Oh
Chocolate.
yes, I've
It's
been
like that.
there.
It's like that
Yeah.
place. It's like,
Yeah,
what do I get? If you don't
that's
know what
right.
Bones is, I'll put a link even to that below. That chocolate place is insane. My wife grew up in that area, and she took
Oh,
me, and so that's a really awesome childhood place she shared with me. And oh, okay, so getting back onto topic. Well, I mean that was sort of on topic. Um, do you read condensed scores at all to get any inspiration, or do you?
oh yeah, definitely. And whenever I'm feeling like anxious about, well, can I really do this? Or I have this idea like I want to do this, but I have questions. Um, I look at scores. So when I several years ago, I actually composed two choral pieces, and um they're accompanied, or they're scored for choir and wind ensemble. And at that point, although I had played in wind ensembles for more than 10 years, actually writing for wind ensemble, I had to go back and, I thought, how do I do this? When I had gone to school, I had gotten my doctorate and I had done this combination, which was really wonderful at the University of Minnesota for voice performance and composition, and also did study some choral conducting there. But when you study, what studying composition means is it's a lot of different things. And it's not like you come out of school and then you know everything there is to know about orchestration and instrumentation. You have to keep learning by doing and by studying. So I then ordered some Vaughan Williams and Holst scores, and it's something that I'm always telling myself, I have to make time for score study. So I look at it kind of like, if you love to build mechanical things, like then, like if you want to build a radio, what do? You take a radio apart. You take an existing radio, take it apart, look how it's made. And that's kind of how I view how you learn how to compose, is you look at the music of other composers and listen to it, like go to concerts. Even now, what I'll do is if I'm going to go to a big performance of a symphony or an opera, if I can get hold of a score, my ultimate goal is to have enough time to sit there, like really learn that score inside out before I go to the concert. And then I enjoy it so much more, but then I get to hear the effects and the why the composer orchestrated in a certain way. And the thing is, in the old days, one way that composers learned to compose was by copying the scores of other composers. When you actually have to write out the parts, you're really learning it. So
that sounds like what a lot of, I mean, I can be included in this. Do you remember those kids like myself that got in trouble and we had to write 100 times on the board? I will not, whatever it is, talking class. I will not, whatever. So rewriting things over and over again, even though it was the same thing that that's actually written, the act of just writing it really like substantiates what you do as a composer? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. And then
Huh.
also as you're writing it, so you're thinking, you're realizing what's happening horizontally and how the parts are connected. And then you're also realizing like you're going through vertically through all the layers and how they fit together and which voices are doubled and so on.
That's interesting. I got connotations of a movie that I like. It's a Sean Connery movie, Finding Forrester. It's about an English professor or a novelist that is cooped up in his flat in, I want to say, forgive me, I'm probably going to be wrong, Boston. It's a basketball story, but the student, Jamal, ends up breaking into the novelist's flat on a dare. And I bring this up to bring the bridge for those who are wondering where this connects, especially for the family members. Finding your words is like finding your notes. You have to take what has worked before and start with that, and then naturally those words. And I never thought about this in composition till you just said it yourself. Is you begin to find your own notes.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yes. Because everything you've heard is going into your mind and blending in with your life experiences and your personality. And then when it comes out, it's this original, mix.
You might have to go back and rework the front part so it's not copyright.
Right.
But I mean, it all, in going back a little bit further in your statement, you talked about, can you really do this? The doubt that seeps into your mind, and with blogging, with the summit, with you starting composing, and then hearing from that one teacher, will show me your portfolio, and that doubt creeps in. It's like, who am I to be able to do this, to bring forth something that it doesn't even cross your mind that it could inspire someone else, because we're so wrapped up in our own world. And for our beginner artists, even through collegiate and those who have done professional, being a professional musician, is every single time you put your lips to that mouthpiece, creating that piece of music, whether it is from someone else or like we've covered on many of the other recordings from all these artists, is improvising. And you heard it from Dr. Sonntag, is improvising gets that creativity, those juices flowing. So I recommend Jamie Abersol for those that need kind of a guideline of what to, that free flow state of creativity, and deconstruct what has already worked. And it goes well with the lessons in business and in life, is you repeat the successes of those in front of you. That's why we have this Euphonium Summit, bringing on Dr. Sonntag, Dr. Adam Frey, Dr. Amy Shoemaker-Bliss, Matteo Tundo, and Dr. Don Palmeyer. The list goes on. There's success in front of you. You just have to find your own way through our successes, our footsteps, and to establish your path. And you can make your own path. You don't have to do it your own way. You take some of the feedback we are offering you and just laying out for you those breadcrumbs, like Hansel and Gretel, those bedtime stories. Follow those breadcrumbs, y'all, that trail that leads to success. And you never know where you're going to end up. It is, as life seems to sneak up on us, it really is a shrinking of worlds. Like I didn't know Dr. Sonntag before I even found her piece for Euphonium, that she graduated from UTEP, which is my hometown of El Paso. And I mean, Euphonium, UTEP, El Paso, to our backgrounds of Prussia. And we're getting into like so many really intrinsic and symbolic workings. Like, you're meant to see this recording and be part of this amazing what we're doing now. So I thank you for participating and joining us as a future artist, hopefully professional, or even making it helping you define your walk and your path in this life, even if euphonium is just a little splinter of that life that you're going to walk and traverse past high school or secondary school or wherever you're at internationally. If this impacts you in any way for your benefit now or 10 years down the road, that's the impact that we want. That's the impact that I know will happen, and maybe be inspired to even pay it forward, even though you're at a place in life that you're going, can I really do this? Can euphonium be something greater than what I know it to be in middle school band or high school band, or as a hobby, as a community band member, as a professional artist? There's so much more, y'all. So much more. Oh man, my teeth feel like they're rotting how rich this interview is. So wow. Where are you at now as you write your compositions? Do you find yourself writing? I noticed that you love out hiking, and especially outdoors in Alaska in that fresh air. Do you write outdoors as well as indoors? Where do you write? Where do you compose?
So in Alaska, I was with this group in this program called Composing in the Wilderness. So there were 9 composers all together hiking, and then we flew in a bush plane to this remote old gold mining camp near the Yukon. And we were in these old restored cabins with no electricity. There was electricity in one, but we brought our laptops. And I composed so fast and easily there because we'd been hiking and we didn't have any other, we were unplugged, and that was really wonderful. And then when I was orchestrating my piece for the Ensign Chorus, I just couldn't stand sitting. I had to do that in the summer, and I couldn't stand being inside all the time. So I have a table out in my backyard, and I live in a really beautiful forested area. And I just put this table out in the backyard. I could plug in my laptop, and I orchestrated that whole thing sitting outside. So my office window, my home office window I'm very, very fortunate in the neighborhood that we live in. Like I look outside and I see green and trees, and I need that, like that visual. I mean, if I had to compose, I have actually composed a really piece I love finished it in the car, but actually I was driving those car rides. I was driving along Lake Superior, right? So the nature is definitely big medicine for me, and whether I'm writing directly about nature or something completely else, it really puts my mind in a good place for composing.
And I like to piggyback on that, because as our artists on all different levels here that are participating in the summit, I find that, especially with myself, that unplugged state or that let loose state of free flow, where you're in that flow state, is what a lot of people will kind of put that definition, that word on. That flow state is different for most people. It's not going to be nature. For a lot of y'all, it could be running, it could be walking, it could be weightlifting, it could be just going for a walk around the neighborhood, or a car ride, or playing music, or at the piano, like your flow state was when you first dove into the world of music, where it unlocked that in a way, God's gift of composing in you, I guess we could say. But it unplugs that flow state. Yeah, there we go. It unplugs the flow state. There you go. Yeah. And you can really create that fluidity and that motion of momentum. There you go. Momentum toward completion, and really go, I can do this. It's going, and you don't want that to ever end. You really don't. Is that what you find?
Yeah. You you need to create time where you're not interrupted, and you need to allow yourself that. Like my composition professor at University of Minnesota, Alex Lubit, he would tell me, he said, if you get to a place when you're writing something and it's just, you're hitting a blockade. He said, get up and do something else and go for a walk. And then I learned that I needed that time to go for long walks and think, let the music go through my head, and I would actually accomplish a lot that way. So sitting at a desk, we've got kind of this, in this corporate world, if you're not sitting at a desk, you're not working, but that's really not the way it works with composing or even performing, honestly.
Well, yeah, you're gonna blow your lip out, or you're gonna do more damage, more irreparable damage, because you're practicing something wrong, and you keep practicing the wrong things, and that becomes a habit instead of doing it from the right place, the right frame of mind, and not being distracted.
Right.
So what are 3 things that you'd wished you would have applied when you first started composing, that you teach your students now? And are you, and to second that, do you have a consortium of students underneath that you're kind of mentoring and guiding on this journey?
Well, I am teaching composition as a lecturer at Pacific Lutheran University. So these are undergraduate students, and some of them are music majors, some are music minors, and with different goals. Like I've taught music education majors, I've taught music minors who are majoring in music theater, musical theater, and I've taught composition majors, and of course they all have different tracks. Like one was a saxophonist, so he was really interested in woodwind music and so on. And so basically I always try to find out what the student's background is and what their interests are, because that's where you really want to start. You don't want to start by, I guess when I was younger, I seriously thought this, and I said this out loud. I can't be a composer because I loved Bartók, who I discovered, by myself. And I was like, I'm never going to be as good as he is, so I can just forget it. And I also thought that I had to learn. So studying counterpoint and harmony, it is really important. However, I thought I had to learn everything there was to know about music theory before I could begin composing. And the fact is, you can learn about, you actually understand music theory by composing also. So you should be doing both, and you shouldn't wait and think, I have to know this all before I start. So that, I would say that is a really important thing. If you feel the urge to compose, just start writing something. And you don't expect that the first thing you write is going to be this symphony that wins the Pulitzer Prize. Like, and it's still going to be valuable, right? In fact, one of the very first choral pieces I wrote, I just as an undergraduate for choral arranging class, is a piece that I still love. Choirs love it. It's a small piece, but it's not trite at all, and it's not simple, but it's not, you know, overly difficult, and you just never know. And even if the very first attempts don't end up being performed, they're just like with performing, composing takes practice. And the more you do it, the more you learn, the easier it gets.
And that goes, that really goes well with what we just spoke about, what you spoke about with rewriting the condensed scores or even the full scores, and just getting out some manuscript paper and writing out the parts by hand.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Kind
And
of
I
like,
would say, yeah, go ahead.
Go right
You know, you don't have to think, oh, I want to be a composer for my profession to compose. I mean, you can be, you know, you're a performer and you just feel like composing something, and that's okay, and you should do it. That would be my advice.
Huh. So, and it's really fascinating how we've progressed on this Euphonium Summit in the frame of mind that I would love to impart and have impacted on the community is the framework, the mindset of growing beyond what everybody says the euphonium is currently and has been for the last 100+ years, because euphonium is a new instrument in every sense of the way. We are the baby of the family. Baby tuba, I mean, we're nicknamed baby tuba and all sorts of other stuff. And we really have progressed in this day and age of really reaching outside of the box, going from Matteo Tundo's compositions involving electronic recordings and bending sound, acoustic, really amazing stuff, to how it's applied to even diving into operas soon to be, or orchestras, or like being a main facet, because our world is significant. Euphonium is significant, and what we do individually is significant. You are significant. Whoever you are, you're here for a reason watching this interview. And I really appreciate you sticking by, and whether it's this year, you find this recording years down the road, really appreciate you taking the time to dive into this, because you can do this. You can incorporate euphonium where you're at into your life story and work at making it a profitable for your future and for your own legacy. Not only legacy for yourself, but for your kids, your grandkids, even your community, or orchestra programs or community band programs. There's so much, there's a lot of need for you to be who you are meant to be: composer, musician, combined as an artist. And it makes me want to take the Aebersol or even my condensed scores, because I love Appalachian Spring, and that's my go-to condensed score, is writing it out. I never considered that as a euphonium artist or hobbyist now, to put that piece together and seeing how that interplays. That framework is really special, Dr. Sonntag. It's really special. How, moving on to this, is how we talked about this a little bit before we started this recording, is how do you determine what pieces and projects to take on is per like the complexity, like writing an opera or a libretto or whatever? Is it just what inspires you that you want to free write, or how does that go?
You know, I have very, very rarely written something if I didn't have a fest performance lined up in advance. So I'll, for example, for my opera, so I did know, I thought, I want to write opera, but then I thought, well, I'm not going to start one until I know that I have a performance of this lined up, because it's a huge commitment. I mean, we're talking months and months of lots of work, during which then I would not be composing other pieces. So I had the opportunity to premiere this opera at the school I was teaching, and that was how I got it off the ground. And then the same thing with the I'd always wanted to write sonatas for solo instruments, especially for brass, because as an undergrad, I had played these sonatas and I had accompanied everybody. I played like all the Hindemith sonatas, which are really hard.
Yeah,
And
especially the French
but
ones.
I was really I really loved that genre. And then I thought, and so you have to look for opportunities to and say, you know, sometimes it will be someone approaching you and commissioning you, and commission has a very wide meaning.
Why don't you dive into that for our families that are watching?
Yeah. So commissioning can be anywhere from you have this relationship with somebody, with a composer, and whatever deal you work out together is a commission. You have to understand that composers have to make a living, and it takes a lot of time. So you know, there are guidelines for how much to pay a composer. There are some different guidelines. Some of those guidelines are, you look at them, you think, wow, who could afford to pay that much? You know, but they are in a way, they give you a picture of how much training and time it takes to compose. But if that's not possible, there are other negotiations and ways to do it, right? So you know, if you are interested in having a piece composed for you, you know, just reach out to composers and say, would it be possible for you to do this? And you can ask, well, how much would you need to do this job? And here's what I'm able to offer. And then you work through it that way.
So one thing that I've been really geeking out on is diving into the composers and the artist background. I would love to the Euphonium student artists to understand and get to know where each composer, artist, where they're at and what their journey's been like, to see any commonality, any elements that synchronize or meet up with their background to your background or someone else's. And these interviews, getting to know you, getting to know these other artists or composers, and saying, yeah, I really like, she understands, or yeah, she says this, and you know, it really syncs up. And that's really you don't really find that a lot in this life. When you're out and about, especially in high school or middle school, And there's very few people that come into your inner circle in a way that get to know you or get to see this artist side of you really develop and take form. And to get someone who is like-minded, like Dr. Sonntag or any of our artists on the Euphonium Summit, composer, artist, feel free to leave a message or comment, and we'll get you synced up or reached out some way, shape, or form to where we can make something really special happen. And if you have that really amazing that feeling, and that everything that she's spoken about, or any of our contributors on the Euphonium Summit, if you feel like you really have that bond forming, and you really don't have that relationship yet formed with her or any of the artists, leave a message, write a comment down below. She'll see this. I'm knocking on wood. She'll eventually see this, or I'll see it, or one of our, someone will see it and go, hey, this kid's really taking initiative. We really want to see our future artists, current and future artists, take that initiative to reach out, to make that difference in your community, your band. By taking that initiative, look what happened. We even have Dr. Sonntag here with us. It's all about initiative, y'all. And wow, that's exactly what I think. It's really cool. So when you started researching and going into your bachelor's degree program, obviously your parents knew that you wanted to compose from early on. How did they support you? I mean, they kept on buying you these books, and you flip them upside down. Part of the transcription before we started this recording. But how else did they support you in that journey, your beginning journey, even now? How do they support you now, even where you're at today?
Well, my parents were not actually really happy about my decision to study music. And the books were like, they were books that they already had, my mother had from years ago. And when I got into high school, I got a job, and I spent all my money on music and my lessons. I would go to the music store and find stuff. But my dad, for sure, and sometimes my mom, I had 4 younger siblings. And so dedicating your whole Saturday morning, like getting up and leaving the house at 8 a.m. to drive your kid across town and then have to go back and get them at noon, and you're a teacher working like
crazy hours.
6. Yeah. So that was a big commitment. And when I don't know how old I was pretty little. I remember one time that my mom actually sat down with me at the piano, and I was, making stuff up. And she said, well, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to transcribe it. So she sat there and wrote down what I was playing.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I don't have that piece of paper, but I will always remember that. That stuck in my head. I think that experience really did stick, like, oh, I'm actually composing music, right? And so these little things. And then when I was in high school, my mom found an ad in the paper for there was a Milwaukee Symphony was doing a youth orchestra during the summer, and the rehearsals were at a park that was pretty close to our house. So she found that article and showed it to me, and I was like, oh, I want to do this, and I ran down there and I auditioned, and I was one of only 2 student trumpet players in that orchestra. We played with Milwaukee Symphony players, were like half the orchestra, and students so we were actually playing with the professionals.
Wow.
And we're rehearsing in this beautiful outdoor pavilion. and we're playing Beethoven and we're playing Copland, and I was just in heaven. And that is where I really thought, I'm going to be a professional musician after that summer. And I actually met then, I hadn't taken trumpet lessons since I was in 8th grade. I had these free lessons in school. And then I just practiced on my own for my first 3 years of high school. But then I met a Milwaukee Symphony player, and he said, well, what do you want to do? Like, he could tell, like, and so I said, well, I want to be a professional, musician, and I don't have a teacher. And so it took me an hour on the city bus to get to his house. But every Saturday then in my senior year at high school, I wrote, and I paid for that with my own, I was working and I paid for my lessons myself. And then, my parents, I think they came from a different world, and they were really afraid of, how am I going to make a living as a musician? And it's not secure, and it's worldly and all this. And, and then after I got started, they realized I was really serious. I was doing okay. And, so they've always been really supportive that way.
So have they attended any of your premieres?
Yes, in fact, so my opera was premiered at the college where I was teaching, which is southeast of Cleveland, Ohio, and they were living in Chicago, and they drove out to see that premiere.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So they've gotten to really see you flourish.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what do they think now? I would love to interview them and see what their take is. But going back to have you ever shared that memory of your mom, that transcription moment with her, and how that's really made a really big, huge, monumental impact in your life?
No, I have not. And now that you mention it, I definitely will, because
you can share this recording, because
that's right.
To capture this moment is really breathtaking, because as a parent of 4 musicians myself, getting to have that moment that I won't probably know those impacts that I have on my kids. I hope to have, or whatever, these moments that they're with you are gold, are really gold, y'all. And whether they're a beginner artist to high school artists, or even the collegiate, make it out to their concerts. Step up, and because a lot, as a band booster myself, I don't see a whole lot of other families like taking the initiative to be a part of their kids' life, or going to the marching band competitions, or being involved in their solo work, or progressing themselves as an individual, taking it goes back to what Dr. Sonntag said, is, can I really do this? Your students probably wondering the same thing. Can I really do this? And I mean, everybody in life, I still battle with it myself, and Dr. Sonntag, maybe not so much, goes through times of, can I really do this? Can I really make this impact? Can I, whatever that is? And our kids are even more prone to that. Our students need that support. They're in a critical time, whether they say it to you or not. Hopefully you have that communication. Throw them a bone. Say, hey, you can do this. Or, here, I heard this interview, and maybe this might help. Maybe you be inspired by it. Maybe, who knows? But making that impact is key for your family relationship moving forward. Because as a parent, you're a parent, we're all parents. We know that impact is key for our kids. We want to make that biggest move forward. Even if it's failing forward, it's still forward progress in our relationship with our our children, with our students, those around us. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I just thought of about the this fear that, can I really do this? I was at a American Choral Directors Association composing symposium, and composer Stephen Stuckey, who was a Pulitzer
Pulitzer.
Prize winning composer and professor at Cornell. He was one of the mentors there.
Wow.
And I brought him this piece that we had to compose something basically overnight. And I brought it to him. And then he looked at it and he said, well, like, why are you here? because there's nothing I can tell you about how to compose. And I was like, oh, I'm sure that's not true. But then I said to him, I said, I wrote this, I had to write it really fast. And every time I get done writing something that like works really well, I have this huge fear that I don't know how I did this and how am I ever going to do this again? And he said, oh, I have the same thing. So, that was really, yeah, that was, and now that you mentioned about the parental support, I think of all these little flashes where my parents kind of their endorsement or their where their support was really important. Like when my dad was my 8th grade teacher, and our class always did this big Christmas program for the church. And we did this little kind of cantata by this composer named Fritz Reuter. And it had this beautiful piano part. So actually from the time I was grades 5 through 8, sang this thing together. And when I was in 5th grade, he started having me accompany it, which is like putting a lot of trust in your kid to actually do this, for these classes in public. And I didn't. So those moments are really, really important. They just last and really help, give you the feeling that you can accomplish something.
Well, that leads us really into this next question. That adaptation moment that you had at that symposium of sorts overnight. How did you adapt from that moment? How did you adapt that scenario that you found yourself in? How did you adapt that, move forward from that?
Well, then I realized, okay, I'm going to have this feeling. It's going to come up. Like when I finish something that's been successful, I'm going to have anxiety that I'm not going to be, that's going to be the end, or that somebody's going to find out that I really can't ever do this again. And I know that that's just a voice, and I just need to keep going. And then and so that has been really helpful, because it's the, what you don't want to do is not start because you're afraid. Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid of making mistakes or even having to throw things out when you start. The starting is the important thing, and then just keeping at it.
I find it fascinating. At the beginning of our recording here, well, sort of near the beginning, you talked about writing short works for ballet, and you ended up throwing them away because they're not, it's not relevant music and stuff like that. But you still started, even though you ended up throwing those away. I hope someone kept them, so years later down the road, hey, look, I found something. But those clues of like those breadcrumbs and that bridge of how you started and where our students are at right now, these student artists who are starting to compose or starting to find their way, finding those breadcrumbs that they can go, oh, wait, I heard, this is what happened on her journey. I just went through something similar. I better keep this as a memento to like document their journey of like, having stuff on the wall of, I achieved this, I achieved this, I achieved this, I achieved this. And then those moments of what a lot of people would call imposter syndrome seep in, or those doubts seep in. You look back and see what you've done, even those solo ensemble competitions, those other competitions that you've even entered. It doesn't matter, you entered them. No matter how well you do, it is what I call a control point of, you start at a base and then you try to improve upon that base. No matter where you're at, that's your base you start from, and that's your starting line. Your finish line is when you're finally said and done in this life, and you've made the impact that you've walked toward this whole time, and you've achieved this. Not only did you achieve, you've impacted someone around that point. It doesn't matter if you don't know the impact that you've made, but know that you have made that impact. Like Dr. Sonntag with that ballet, those pieces of music that she wrote, she probably doesn't know the impact that she had on some of those ballerinas or other musicians at that point. And we have to move on. And at some point, we may be blessed in time to know that impact that we've made, but you just know that that impact that you are doing what you're doing is worth it. Every single step that you make on this planet is worth it. Just fail forward. Don't go backwards. Go forward. I hope that even recorded. But that was a really special moment. I mean, even going back to your parents and developing those original works. What is do you have any other like tips or strategies that you'd like care to impart on our future artists, composers currently that maybe are sitting down for their midterms or finals, or a huge project that they may be watching and trying to draw inspiration from at some point in the future, that you can help them with a strategy or a frame of mind shift into creating their original piece, or adapting, like we talked about earlier, the Finding Forrester analogy, finding their own words. Maybe hopefully they've listened enough to where they go back and say, well, I don't know if I have a condensed score that I would say it's my favorite piece that I could start transcribing or rewriting. What would be another tip or strategy that you'd, or if you have another strategy that you'd like to pull out for us?
If you just have this burning, just a feeling like you've got music in you that you just need to let out, that you just want to do that, but you just have no concrete ideas of what or how, you can just think about something in your life that that you want to write about, and if you can't think of anything, or that seems too difficult, don't think about it too hard. Just start doing it and then see what evolves. And usually when you start doing it, things really start to roll. Also know that if you have a really exciting idea, and you can actually visualize the whole, you're not going to actually visualize every note, probably. That's also a little bit of a myth that actually happens, but
Mozart.
that, yeah. Right. But if you well, first of all, let me back up a little, and do visualize the end. Visualize what it'll be like, who will perform it, like see the performance and visualize it as a happy success.
Like
Then,
at their favorite or most wanted venue.
yes, right, yes. And then know that as you go from that, as you'll start to work and you'll have this burst of energy, there will be times when you're feeling like, oh no, I can't, I don't know how to finish this, or I'm having this problem. That happens with every project, and you just keep working and you go through these
Ebbs and flows.
yeah, right, yes, and you're learning along the way, but keep that vision in the end. And then surprising turns can happen as well.
So let me to go on to that. I know that there's a few apps or programs that maybe Finale has, or Smart Music or Make Music, or any of these apps have an ability. I know you can download Otter and record your voice, but to plug it into a MIDI sensor or something like that, to where it like transcribes in real time the notes that maybe if they scat, if they know how to scat, for beginner artists and stuff like that. Jazz utilizes a lot of scat. It's a vocalization of notes using different kinds of not realistic words. It can be, and I it really is there an app that composers can use that has that ability that you know of that you use?
I have never used something like that. I'm trying to think though. That's a good question. I'm thinking
It
it
just popped
must
into my
be.
head, so that's not part of the
Yeah.
questionnaire, so I do apologize, but
Yeah, no.
curious.
Yeah, no, I just click in my notes. So, there you can do it obviously with keyboard, with MIDI, where you can play and then it will transcribe what you're playing onto the staff. It's I think the later versions of Finale and some other programs are more accurate. Sometimes the rhythms would not exactly be right when you did that, but that exists. And it's an interesting question about whether that exists for if you're singing or playing. I would think that there's something out there that could do that.
And if you know, or by the time this comes out, if you do know of a program, write that down below. We'd be curious to know. I do have a question about that, and vocalization of certain notes. Do you, in your class time, do you allow for some free form, or kind of like a way? So in oratory, we have something that's called poetry slams or free flow, where you, or even rap, for those that are really good with words, can craft something so amazing. Do you allow time for a free creativity period in your classroom setting? I'm just curious.
Well, my composition lessons are all one-on-one individual, but I always very much encourage my students to spend time improvising on their instrument. And a lot of people think improvising is only jazz style improvising, but you don't have to be a jazz specialist to improvise. So just start playing and just let whatever comes out come out. That's when I compose, actually, for example, if I'm setting an art song, I will actually take the printed text and put it up on the piano, and I'll start improvising, and that is usually the start of the art song, because
Wow.
I can't even articulate exactly how a certain text, I'm not thinking technically. I'm not thinking, oh, here I'm going to play high notes and then I'm going to put an arpeggio here. I don't think that at all. I'm just coming straight from my internal, unconscious right into the piano. And then from there, I develop, I think, yeah, that's what this feels like. And then I'll start with that motivic material.
Huh. When did you start with the piano books that your mom and dad imparted on you from a young age? When did scales become part of your daily practice? I'm
Never.
curious. Okay, you didn't hear that.
So I mean, as a trumpet player, I had a teacher, and then I did learn scales. I practiced scales, but as a pianist, all of my technical training came from repertory. So then when I went and auditioned at the university, and I was so naive, I just wanted to take piano lessons, and they're like, well, okay, we'll accept you as a piano major. I was like, oh, okay. And then my piano teacher, he knew that I had never had lessons. So that I had learned all my technique from repertory. So he said, okay, I'm going to treat you differently than my other students. And I'm going to give you this repertory that has scales in it or has arpeggios in it. And you're going to learn it from that. So that's
that was
what
a
I
great
did.
bridge.
Yeah.
That's a real ingenious way of incorporating that element to your learning style.
Yes. Right.
That really
Yeah.
is unique and
Mhm.
very intriguing. Wow. What other instruments? So you learned piano first, then went to trumpet, then all throughout that, I assume choir was a big part of your world.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we sang in elementary school through 8th grade. Singing was just, and I loved to sing. And then I was in choir only my freshman year in high school because I felt that it was just had to do with the choir director's control of the group, and it was too unserious. I was very serious about my music, and so I dropped choir and I stayed in the band. But then when I went to the university, I really wanted to sing in the choir, and so I started doing that, and then I pretty quickly switched over to being a voice major.
That's incredible. So with your students, what I mean, we're diving into I think a new time period, new block of time where with this Euphonium summit and with all the different composers coming together with our artists and with on all levels, I think we're coming into a time of newness and a rebirth of musicality that is I almost want to say transcends what has been done for so many centuries before in performance. I mean, we have, so to clue you in on one of my other interviews, we ended up coming to a point where we brought in Dave Matthews Band into our conversation, being able to create an intimate setting. You had mentioned bring Dave Matthews Band up as a performing artist group because they created a live element into their music that transcends such a different musical experience live than it does recorded on a CD. And so with the opera, with ballet, with orchestra, I'm dry. The wheels are spinning to where the composers that are coming up that watch this interview and watch all the other interviews. Potentially would love to have them watch every other interview, to take inspiration from the possibilities in watching how intricate every single instrument is, and not basing their, I guess we could really dive back into your scales. It's not really important to, for you notice that scales weren't part of your upbringing, and really till college. And that's almost like a euphonium player, not necessarily not knowing your scales. You have to know your scales. But the box that this world has placed us in previously is not the same box that we are in now, especially with you watching this, whoever you is, and let us know where you're at in your stage, and come back 5 years from when you posted whatever you do below, and see that journey, that path that you've taken, and notice that, wow, I mean, I'm hoping that impact is made. Even if I'm not here, showing others that this impact can and will make a difference in your life. But the composers, Dr. Sonntag is having under her tutelage in her program with one-on-ones, and composers throughout the world that are watching right now, take note to all the different things that you can see and pick up. I mean, even go August Rush. I don't know if y'all have seen this, but take that creativity and that freshness, and don't box it up. Let it flow, and find that flow state that you need to put yourself in. I'm reminded of one of my son's friends who plays clarinet, now trumpet, and many others. He's beginning to compose things. I can't wait to share this interview with him. There's so many things that can happen, and influences that are out there. Pardon me. It's just breathtaking. And that all leads into the question I have for you is, what opportunities with our conversation in this interview do you see your students having now more so than when you stepped into this conversation beforehand, if any?
Well, I mean, for one thing, it reminds me to help them explore the different instruments, and to stress to them how beautiful an instrument euphonium is, and that it does get lost in the texture. It's just there, for the bass notes. Mm-hmm. I know when I performed this, or composed this sonata, even when I composed the pas de deux, that's kind of just the most lyrical and very singable, very vocal-like writing. But then when I composed the other two movements, I thought, okay, now I really am writing this I really want to show the euphonium. And I started listening. I actually went and listened to, I can't remember what the piece was. It was just a fantastic solo euphonium piece, so I could hear what the euphonium does. And
let me know what piece that is.
Yeah, when I find it, I will. I can't remember. I think I also did Hindemith write a sonata for euphonium. No, so it was. But anyway, it struck me.
For trombone, yes.
Oh, okay. But the versatility of euphonium, it's just huge, from the range to the dynamic differences you can make. It's it's just can do so much. And so I thought, wow, I've kind of hit a gold mine here that nobody really realizes. They just associate, and I mean, I had already learned a little bit about tuba, that it was also a much richer instrument than, everybody thinks. It's just
Oompa.
oom pa pa. Right. So that for sure is something that I will encourage my students to write for euphonium, and to go to their euphonium peers who are studying euphonium and say, hey, would you like me to write something for you? And
Or
because
better yet, have them drop in a link. Hey, I'm interested in writing for euphonium. Man, their stuff's gonna blow up below.
right,
Because all
that's a
these
great
euphonium
idea.
artists
Yes.
are gonna be, biting at the bit, going, where can I get some new stuff? And that experience and that creativity from all sides. Now, you said you had a student that you have in your lessons that plays saxophone.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of my favorite quartets was originally written for saxophone quartet and was arranged by Lenny Niehaus. It's a whole,
Okay.
I have all of them, and they're all out of print. So I mean, I have all the scores and everything. I had to buy them from Britain because all the publishing houses closed down that published these pieces for euphonium, tuba euphonium quartet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the dynamics, I mean, for those that don't know, there is something called Tuba Christmas for euphoniums and tubas to get together and play Christmas tunes. And it's from a set book. However, there's a really awesome, there's a 3-part series for Lenny Niehaus for Christmas carols, and they're all jazz suites. And it just blows my mind. And so maybe utilizing that as a base to find their own notes, especially that saxophonist. I know the saxophone parts are still in publication, that they can find this Lenny Niehaus saxophone quartet, but utilize that as a kind of a base to find their own words, notes. So just to kind of tip the hat toward, I love Lenny Niehaus as a composer. His transcriptions are some of my favorite. They're complex, quite complex, and it takes a lot of really dedicated time and study to get that synchronicity, that oneness of a group melded together to hear what is actually being performed. It's really awesome.
Yeah, transcribing that is definitely, that is another way of training as a composer in discovering what's possible for other instruments, is like taking a saxophone quartet, and what's so interesting about that is saxophone quartet would be played by like 4 different instruments, and that same thing is going to be played by all euphonium players. So that's how versatile the euphonium is.
It is. And I found an article recently, Dave Warden had put it on his blog. The creation of the person who invented the saxophone is the same one that invented the euphonium.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, so I understand. It's just really rich, the history of euphonium, even though it's a new instrument. Finding stuff out about the history and the applicability of what we do and what lies out there is pretty incredible. As far as your daily life goes as a composer and instructor, what's your routine like on a daily basis and how do you find that creativity in a day-to-day basis to do what you do?
Well, what I have found is that I can compose pretty much any time, and it's like the frosting on the cake of my day. Even if it's just going through and editing, it's just like so relaxing for me to go in and look at these details and work things around. So I have but I have a lot of other obligations, and so I have to map out okay, this is like this afternoon I'm going to work on my on the pas de deux orchestration for that piece, and I set, I have my
I don't think
deadline.
that's on the recording, Dr. Sonntag. I think that's on the transcription. Well, we talked about that. Yeah. So you have to get that transcription to know what we're talking about right here.
Yes.
So we're talking about time blocking.
Yeah. So time blocking, right. Time blocking. And I definitely, like, I have to be really conscientious about saying, because, you're working at home as a composer, and then someone says, oh, could you do this or that at 3 o'clock? And that's when you're planning to be composing. You have to say, no, like I say I'm working then, because for myself and the other people, because sometimes people just think, oh, even though you're getting commissions, and when as a college professor you're expected to have output as a creator, so it's part of your job, even though you're not actually, you're sort of paid partly to create, right? So you have to really be disciplined about keeping that time. It's also really important to have enough sleep so that you're not tired, because it's easy to think, oh, I'm just going to work on this way into the wee hours of the night. But if you're tired, you're going to be making mistakes, and then you need to have a really regular, healthy sleep routine to be able to be creative, to really be creative. And
unlock and unplug.
Yeah, right. And you have to schedule in times for rest. One thing that I have used that's really has helped me is called the Pomodoro technique, where you have a little timer, and it's based on how long your brain can work without being fatigued. So you work, like, you're going to say, okay, for 2 hours, I'm going to work in 25-minute blocks, but every 5 minutes when that timer goes off, I stop, get up, and do something relaxing. And for me, it might be actually moving around physically. For others, it might be just like lying down and closing your eyes. And then at the end of those 25-minute, or you take a 5-minute break, you go back to it, you do that for a couple of hours, and then you take a long break, like at least an hour, and then you add and then you go back to the shorter increments, and you definitely, so you concentrate without, there might be times where you're in that flow and you just feel like, oh, I could work for 12 hours, and that's going to happen sometimes, but it's actually, consistency is really important, and giving yourself time to rest.
That's awesome. I'll have to put the link below for the Pomodoro technique. So that's incredible. What books would you recommend our listeners, viewers, euphonium artists, composers? What books have made an impact in your life to get you where you're at today?
Oh gosh.
Maybe 3 then.
Look it up. I have them. I have to look at the title. Sorry.
That's fine.
There's a book by Dale Trumbore. It's called Staying Composed. That's a wonderful book. Staying Composed. There is, and I can't remember the title. I'm sorry, I can't remember. Oh,
It's fine.
The composer, just like reading what other composers have written, like the composer Dominic Argento, who some people don't know. I mean, he wrote operas, actually. He was from Minnesota. He taught at the University of Minnesota, but he just wrote a beautiful book about his composing, and it's so inspirational to read books like that. Not just biographies of composers, that's interesting too, but read actually what composers have, like current composers are writing about about their lives and what inspired them. And what is it now? I can't remember the title. There's a book by he's a choral conductor, James Jordan, and it's about the soul of the musician. I have to look up the title. I have it here. I could look it up now. I don't want to leave
Right.
The musician's soul, maybe. Anyway, that's a wonderful book for any kind of musician.
The Musician's Soul. You're correct.
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, man, I can't wait to interview you again, and perhaps and I thank you for taking this time out of your day to impart on us these nuggets of gold, Alaskan gold in a sense. It's just really rich, and letting us enjoy your passion, and letting that really resonates with our audience, and seeing what kind of ripple effects that this creates going forward. Thank you for joining us on this Euphonium Summit 2023, and being part of this epic adventure that we're diving into. I can't wait to see what happens next. I really can't. Looking forward to it. If you have any questions as a viewer or a student, artist, or a family member, any questions or comments, or what you think of this interview, how it has impacted you, please leave comments below. We'd really appreciate the like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. You know what the drill is. We really do appreciate your time, and thank you for making an impact in advance, because the impact that you make today will be even greater tomorrow. Take care, y'all, and thank you, Dr. Sonntag, for joining us.
Thank you so much.